Hi, my name is Bente, I'm the Norse witch, and today we will talk about rune throwing. This is the second part on rune divination, so if you haven't watched the first part, then go watch that, of course, after this video. In the first part, I talked about very easy types of rune divination, so just pulling one rune or doing very easy past, present, future readings, the fourfold wheel, the eightfold wheel, things like that. Just very, very easy methods for doing rune divination. But as I said, today we will talk about rune throwing. So taking runes in your hand, throwing them on a cloth or something, and then interpreting how these runes are laying on the cloth and in relation to each other, etc. So this is what we will talk about today. The methods that I showed in the first part, you can do basically with any rune set. It doesn't matter if it's wooden slices or crystal runes or stone runes or seashells or whatever rune set you have, you can do those with whatever type of runes. But since this video is about rune throwing, I should probably talk about very shortly about which kind of rune set works best for rune throwing. Since most of the time if you do rune throwing, you will interpret the way that the runes lay on the cloth. So, for example, whether the rune is pointing downward to the cloth or upward towards you if you're reading them. At least in the methods that I use, that is important. So of course you need a set where if you throw the runes, you will have to clearly see, do they fall on the rune or on the blank side. So it's just much easier to do those methods of rune divination, so rune throwing, with any type of rune set that has two clear sides. So anything that is either like a wooden slice or a slice of deer antler or just a slice of stone, like a polished stone that has two clear sides. It's much easier to do that with runes like that. If you have round runes like round stones or round crystals or anything like that, then it will be much harder to do that because it's possible that the rune falls in a way that the rune itself isn't pointing downward or upward, it's pointing sideways. And that will be much harder for you to interpret because you will have to figure out, is it downward or upward? So I would recommend, especially if you're a beginner in rune throwing, that you choose a rune set that has two clear sides. One side has the rune, one side doesn't. So that will just be much, much easier. That being said, let's dive headfirst into the rune throwing methods. Okay, so I will show you 3 ways in this video in which I do rune throwing. One of these, and this is the first one, is a little bit more easy, and it's actually one that I came up myself intuitively. So what you do is, of course, you need some kind of cloth, some kind of rune throwing mat. This mat should be a proper size. So you see my runes are pretty small. So if I put it here in the middle, it's pretty small, so I don't need a huge rune throwing mat. But if your runes are much bigger, I've seen runes that are like double the size like this, then of course you need a bigger mat. Otherwise this wouldn't properly work. So for me, this little rabbit pelt works perfectly, but you can use whatever you want. You can use just a square piece of cotton or linen or whatever you have, whatever you like. You can inscribe runes on it, you can decorate it, you can do whatever you want, really. What you do with this type of rune throwing method is that exactly the way that you would mix up the runes with all these easier pulling out rune divination methods, you will focus, of course, on the question that you have, that you want some guidance on, and then you will mix the runes in the cloth or outside. You can do whatever you want. But I personally feel which runes I want to or I need to pull, so I like to do it with my fingers. When you feel like you have mixed them enough and you feel like, in my case, I feel the rune that I need, you will pull 9 runes. So I will feel 9 runes that I should pull. So I don't know, these 2, and then these 2, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So now I have 9 runes. I will take these in my hand and I will shake them. Shake them up really well, focus on the question, of course, always focus on the question. And then, well, you will throw the runes onto the cloth. Here you have them. This is what you will do afterwards. In this rune throwing method, I divide the mat, or in this case my rabbit pelt. I will divide it into 3 sections. The very center of it is most important to the question. The runes that are like in the middle are kind of important, but not that important. And then the runes that fall on the edges of the rune throwing cloth or the pelt, whatever, aren't that important. You still interpret them, but they have a very minor meaning to your question. So that being said about the regions on the cloth. So what you do now is, of course, I usually start in the center of the cloth because there are the runes that are most important. With this right here, you see there are a lot of runes in the center. So this would probably be a pretty loaded question. And there's like 1 on the corner and then like maybe these 2 or these 3 are in the middle, but these are right in the center. The interpretation of these runes is pretty easy actually, because there are no real like reverse meanings in the runes. So if you see these runes, for example, a lot of people would interpret this rune as a reverse. In this case, in this throwing method, I do not interpret these runes as reversed, although it came up upside down. What I'm instead doing is I look at these runes that fell like upside down, they fell on the rune side, and I will see which runes they are. And I will interpret these runes or the energies of these runes as blocked or reversed, or maybe the rune, like the energy of this rune is absent. Like they will have a kind of reverse or blocked or absent meaning. And the ones that came up with the rune towards me, the rune on top, these will be interpreted normally as like the normal rune reading. For example, I have a tarot card right here where you would interpret them like this normally and then like this reversed. I would not do this in this rune reading. We will look at the center. We have 2 runes that are facing towards me, and we have, for example, 1 rune that is laying on the other 2 runes and that's facing downwards. So this is Thurisas, so this would be kind of either it would be an absence of Thurisas or it would be kind of the negative meaning of Thurisas. So Thurisas, of course, is negative in a lot of cases, though, so especially that this one is laying on top of these 2 would seem to me like this is kind of blocking these 2 runes, or yeah, the chaos and destruction aspect of this rune would be prevalent. If this one would come up like this, then I would interpret it more positively. So maybe more in the protection or the change aspect of it. But since it's coming up this way, it's more negative. Okay, but these 2, they came up with a rune on top. So I would interpret these 2 positively. It doesn't matter if they lay like this or like this or like this. Doesn't matter. It only matters where they are on the cloth and that the rune is pointing towards me. So we have these 3, so we have kind of like primal energy, a lot of energy, health, stuff like that. Even more like life energy right here. So it seems like something destructive has a negative impact on maybe the energy level or on the health of the person, maybe, since Lagos also has connections to death. So maybe something would be, yeah, having a very destructive impact on the health of the person or the life energy of the person. This one came up pretty close to this one too, so I would look at this. Berkana also landed on the rune, so it's more negative. So I would guess since Berkana is very nurturing, motherly, maybe this person didn't really take proper care of themselves. So that is why like this has a negative impact, destructive impact on their health. Makes sense. And this one also came up in the center. Kenas, also in a more negative way. So, you know, this is how I would interpret them. Like the closer they are together, the more I would interpret them together for this specific question. So since these came up pretty close to each other, I would interpret them together, and then these one are a more negative or blocking meaning, and these one are the normal positive meaning of the rune. And if one lands on the other, then it has an even more blocking impact on this rune. And then you would do that with the runes that came up in the middle. So these, I would look at these three. They came up individually, so I would not interpret them together. They are individual factors. So we have a negative impact of dagas, or an absence of the dagas energy, same with Throw, and same with Sobilo, but all individually. So they're individual impacts on this question. And then also we have the Ansus rune. Doesn't have that much impact because it's like on the corner of the mat, so it doesn't have that much of an impact, but it's a positive impact. So this is how I would interpret them the easy way if I would interpret the runes by throwing them. As I said, this was a type of rune throwing method that I came up with myself. I just came up with it intuitively, so if you vibe with it, use it. If you don't, then leave it. And now the second way of throwing the runes. I have to say, before I show this to you, this is huge UPG for me. Like the one that I showed before, already UPG because I came up with it myself, but this is even more UPG because I kind of channeled this way of throwing the runes from Odin. Do what you will with this. You don't have to like believe me that it worked. You can believe me that it worked, but I definitely didn't came up with this way myself, although it is actually a little bit similar to the one that I showed you before. But yeah, I channeled this from Odin. Do with it what you will. It's hard to talk about this because a lot of people will think I'm crazy, but like one of the main reasons Odin works with me is that I share this knowledge. So that is why I'm sharing this. But if you think, well, this is UPG, so it's bullshit and I don't believe them that they channeled this knowledge from Odin, then don't. This is what I'm getting at. You don't, like, this is not founded in any literary sources or archaeological sources. This is not from a book or anything. So huge UPG, kind of this whole video is my UPG. So what are you doing with this rune throwing method? In the last rune throwing method, I took 9 runes. With this one, you take all of the runes. So maybe this cloth is a little bit too small for this purpose, but it will have to work for now because I can't like properly film with a bigger cloth. But keep this in mind if you throw like all 24 runes in case of the Elder Futhark, then probably get a cloth that's big enough. Not all of them have to land on the cloths though, but I will describe that now. So you have all of the runes in your hand. You will maybe shift them around a little bit and think about the question for the reading. Think about it until you feel like you have thought about it enough. You will shake them up as you did with the previous method. Shake them up really well. Well, and then you just throw them. And you will pick up all the runes that fell from your table. First of all, you will pick up all the runes that fell outside of the rune throwing cloth. So in my case, that's not that many. And here's the first, or no, the second difference to the first rune throwing method. You will take out all of the runes that fell facing down. So this one, away with you, but you have to try to kind of keep the other runes the way they landed so you don't mess up your reading. And make sure that your pets don't climb onto your rune throwing mat now, because that would suck. They would mess up everything. My cats do that regularly. So maybe kick out your pets before you do this. So then you are left with all of the runes that are facing up towards you. Now, the thing that is the same as in the last throwing method is that the ones in the center are more important, and the more farther out they fell or they landed on the cloth, the less important they are. So that is the same as it was in the last method. But the way of interpreting them is a little bit different. I mean, first thing, of course, I took out all the runes that were facing downwards, so that's already different. Let's start with these two. So it's a little bit difficult because they landed on top of each other, so I would kind of take this up and look at it. When more than one rune lands near each other, so you have a little group of runes, then you have to see how they relate to each other. So, for example, these two runes, this one is pointing there, so normally you would have this rune like this. This is how Throw looks like normally. So this is the top, and this is the bottom, and it landed like this. So the top is pointing away from this rune, but this rune is pointing with the top to this rune, and this is where I would interpret it differently. So if the top of one rune points towards another rune, so we have this little group of runes, these two, and this rune is pointing with the top of the rune towards the other rune, then I would interpret this as positive, or like the normal interpretation of this rune. So in this case, if it's Othala, it would maybe be inheritance, ancestry, your home, your property, stuff like that. If it would point more like this, then I would interpret it more negatively, or like it's like the energy is missing or anything like that. So for example, with Throw, it is pointing with the top away from the other rune. So I would interpret it as more negative. With Throw, that's a little bit tricky because Throw, we don't know that much about Throw. So usually when it points away from the other rune, I would interpret it as you are not supposed to know that yet, or it's still a mystery. If it would land like this in the positive way, it would feel like maybe do some divination on the question, or maybe this mystery or the secret will be revealed soon. But it landed away from the other rune. That would be the first one. If you look at these two, they don't point towards each other or away from each other. Like this one is pointing away a little bit, but they are more parallel to each other. And if they land like this, or like this maybe, this would mean to me that they are kind of blocking each other. Like they're not pointing each other. If they're pointing to each other, that means they are kind of cooperating. If they're pointing away from each other, that would mean they're not working with each other. They are working in different directions. So for example, if you have these two, you have Tivas and Evas, then these two are blocking each other. Whereas with these two runes, you would have like a positive Othala meaning, so property, ancestry, stuff like that, and then a negative meaning of Throw, so you're not supposed to know that. Probably there's something that relates to ancestry or your family or inheritance, your property, whatever, that you are not supposed to know yet, that has any relevance in this question. But if you have like Evas and Tivas, then they're blocking each other. And let's look at these two. What are these two doing? This one is tricky because Evas looks exactly the same way. It doesn't matter if it's like reversed or not. It looks the same way. So this one doesn't have a negative. Same with Hagalas. It looks the same way. So these one together always positive because they don't have a negative. Then of course here, down here, you have two that are again kind of blocking each other. And if you have only one rune, because I said these are interpreted in a way like you look at how they are laying next to each other. But if you only have one rune, how do you interpret that? In that case, actually you do have this typical reverse meaning. So if this one would fall like this, I would interpret it as negative. Like this, I would say it's kind of blocked or absent, and like this would be positive. And that is how you interpret them. I have to say this is very, very tricky to do. The first method that I showed is much easier, in my opinion at least. This one is very tricky because you have to really look at the way that the runes fall on top of each other or in groups, the way they lay towards each other. It's very tricky. So please don't be discouraged if you aren't able to do that. It's very tricky. I'm also struggling with it, but I think rune throwing isn't meant to be easy. I think that is something that we can agree on. Reading the runes isn't easy. So the third method that I want to show you, I also channeled from Odin. So again, do with it what you will. And it's very, very similar to the second one that I showed you, but in this case, you're doing it in a past, present, future way. And since it's pretty similar, I will skip most parts. I will just take some runes and throw them here so that I can show you something. So, in the first and second method of throwing runes, I said that the center is the most important, like the runes that are in the center of the cloth have the most importance in the throwing and have the most influence on the question. And the more farther out they are on the cloth, the less influence they have. This is the same, it's the same way with this meaning, but you will divide in your head, or you can also make yourself a cloth that where you draw it on maybe, or you stitch it on. You will, in your head, divide the cloth into 3 parts, like this. And you will have the past, this is the past, in the middle is the present, and on the right side is the future. Like over here is the future. And you still have the center part. So here is still the center, but if you think about here, the left part being the past, then you would think of the runes that are here in the center are the most important, and the more farther up or down they go, the less importance they have. So instead of having like a circular center and then going outwards, you will have more of a linear center that's most important, and you have a cloth divided into 3 parts. So for example, if you have here is the past, then here's the center. So you probably have algis in the center in the past. So that is the rune that has the most influence or importance to the question for the past. And then Urus is kind of in the center here. It's less important than algis. And then lastly, you have Fehu down here. This one would be the least important in the past. Then you have the present right here, like right here. You would of course have here Lagus and Raido in the center. So these are the most important. Then you have Kenas, less important because it's a little bit more out of the center. And then lastly, you have Evas, which is up here, so it's least important. And the same thing you do with the past part. These 3, most important, less important, least important. And the rest is the same as in the second way of throwing runes. So again, you would look at the runes, how they relate to each other. Like this one, the Lagus rune is pointing towards Raido, but Raido is pointing away from Lagus. So again, this one positive meaning, this one negative meaning, and they kind of relate to each other. This one alone, pointing upwards, so positive meaning. This one alone, laying horizontal, so this one is kind of blocked or absent. This one pointing downwards, so more negative meaning. And this one, most negative meaning. So this is the same as in the second way of throwing runes, but you just have these past, present, future areas on the cloth. I really hope that I described it in a way that's understandable, because it is very hard to do this. So I will definitely also make a post on Patreon for my Patreons where I describe it more thoroughly, probably because I guess it's easier to describe it in a text format than a video format. And here we're coming to the end of this video. Those are all of the rune throwing methods that I personally like to use. If you have any further recommendations, maybe some sources with nice rune throwing methods or any rune divination methods really, then feel free to share them in the comments. I'm always very eager to learn new things, and I bet anyone watching this video will also be very eager to learn new methods, so feel free to share them. Before I end this video though, as always, a Patreon shout out. Thank you very, very much to Prince Edlin's boyfriend, JB, Karina, Tim, Anna, Qboard, Mode, Kalia, Alexander, Laura, Amber, Kristen, John, Ivy, Phoenix, Anton, Noemi, Jenny, Tyler, Els, Betty, Misty, Cameron, Tiffany, Amy, Colette, Soren, Braden, Tell, Timothy, Coffee, or the honorary Gossip Squirrel, Bjorn, Scylla, Ash, Lucy, and Joss. As always, thank you very, very much. As always, I really hope you enjoyed this video. I hope that you maybe found 1 or 2 ways of doing divination with the runes that speaks to you and that you want to try and that works for you. If you did, make sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up, and of course check out my Instagram and my TikTok for my other shenanigans. Of course, check out my shop, link is in the video description. I have rune sets on there and also rune throwing mats and also other things, including bind runes, for example. So if you're into runes, then go check out my shop. There will be something on there for you. And maybe you want to even consider supporting my channel, then you can check out my Patreon. And I will see you in the next video. Bye!